For almost a year, my wife treated every touch for me like an inconvenience. Then I started noticing how alive she still looked in the dark, smiling down at her phone after telling me she was too tired, too stressed, too touched out to even kiss me goodnight. That was when I realized the problem was never that she had nothing left to give. It was that none of it belonged to me anymore. My name's Mason. I'm 39, I live outside Raleigh, and I work as a service advisor at a Ford dealership where half my day is spent calming down angry people and the other half is spent pretending I enjoy being yelled at about brake pads and warranty coverage. I'm not some dramatic guy. Never have been. I like routine. I pay my bills on time. I keep the yard cut, the pantry stocked, the oil changed, the house running. For a long time, I thought that kind of steadiness mattered in marriage. I thought being dependable counted for something when life got messy. My wife, Claire, and I had been married for 10 years. No kids. Just us in a 2-story house with beige siding, a narrow front porch, and a bedroom that slowly turned into the loneliest room I'd ever slept in. In the beginning, Claire used to be easy with me. That's the best way I can say it. Easy in the way she touched me when she passed by. Easy in the way she changed clothes at the foot of the bed without acting self-conscious. Easy in the way she kissed me while I was halfway through saying something dumb. She worked as a project coordinator for a medical software company, and back then, even when her days were stressful, she still came home like she remembered I was part of her life, not just some fixture in the hallway. Then that changed. Not all at once. That would have been easier to fight. Easier to name. No, it happened in small humiliations that were just deniable enough to keep me questioning myself. She stopped kissing me hello when I got home. Then she stopped kissing me goodbye unless I leaned in first. Then even those kisses got dry and distracted, like she was checking a box before getting on with her real day. She stopped changing in front of me too, which sounds like a small thing until you've spent years with somebody and suddenly they're carrying bras and t-shirts into the bathroom like modesty has reappeared out of nowhere. I noticed it the third or fourth time, but I didn't say anything. I told myself people go through phases. I told myself maybe she felt off about her body, maybe she was tired, maybe it was hormones, maybe work had gotten in her head too much. That was the word she used most, actually. Stress. Everything became stress. Why didn't she want to cuddle on the couch? Stress. Why was she going to bed earlier? Stress. Why did she tense up if I put a hand on her waist while she loaded the dishwasher? Stress. Why did every attempt at intimacy suddenly feel like I was asking her to do unpaid labor? That one got me the worst. Because I wasn't pawing at her every night like some desperate teenager. I was trying to feel like a husband in my own house. I'd get into bed, slide a little closer, put my hand lightly on her hip, and almost immediately I'd feel her body go rigid. Then came the sigh. Then the line. Not always the same exact words, but always the same meaning. Not tonight. It started as a sentence. Then it turned into a whole atmosphere. Not tonight because she had a headache. Not tonight because she had an early meeting. Not tonight because she felt gross. Not tonight because her back hurt. Not tonight because she was hormonal. Not tonight because she was just not there mentally. At some point, I stopped hearing the individual reasons and started hearing the pattern underneath them. My wife did not want to be touched by me, and she wanted me to accept that as a mature, supportive husband instead of reacting like a wounded man. So I tried to be mature. I backed off. Gave her more space. Started doing more around the house without being asked because I thought maybe if I took enough pressure off her, she'd soften again on her own. I picked up groceries after work. I handled dinner 3 or 4 nights a week. I even started folding her laundry because I knew she hated doing it, and for a while I convinced myself this was what commitment looked like. Not keeping score. Not making everything about my needs. Just showing up quietly until the rough stretch passed. But the rough stretch didn't pass. It widened. Claire stopped sitting close to me on the couch. If we watched TV, there was always a pillow between us now, or she'd curl up under a blanket at the far end like I radiated inconvenience. If I asked how her day was, I got summary answers. Busy. Fine. Long. Annoying. Then her attention went right back to her phone or laptop. Meanwhile I could hear her laughing on work calls from the office upstairs. Not polite little work laughs either. Real ones. Warm ones. The kind I hadn't heard directed at me in months. One Sunday afternoon, I tried bringing it up gently. I told her I missed us. I told her I felt like she had been far away even when she was sitting right next to me. I made a point of keeping my voice calm because by then I had already started sensing that any emotion from me would get used as proof that I was making things worse. She listened with her arms folded, then told me I was reading too much into a phase. She said women go through changes, that work had been brutal, that she was exhausted in ways I wouldn't understand, and that I needed to stop treating every dip in intimacy like some giant relationship emergency. I apologized. That part still makes me feel stupid. Because what I should have done was trust what I was living in. Instead I let her hand me an explanation that made me feel selfish for hurting. So I stopped bringing it up. I stopped reaching as often too, mostly because the rejection had started feeling ritualized. There's only so many times a man can roll over after getting brushed off by his own wife before his body starts bracing for it in advance. And that should have made things less tense, right? Less pressure on her. Less reason for her to act like my desire was some burden she was carrying. Instead, something stranger happened. The less energy she had for me, the more energy she seemed to have at odd times. Late at night, especially. I started noticing the glow first. Her phone screen lighting up the room after she had already told me she was too tired to even talk. Then I noticed the smile. Not every night. That might have been easier to confront. No, it was smaller than that. A private little curve in her mouth, the kind people make when they're reading something meant just for them. Sometimes there was even a tiny laugh under her breath. Soft. Effortless. Alive. That was what got under my skin. Because if Claire had truly been drained to the point of emotional flatness, I could have accepted that eventually, maybe not happily, but honestly. But she wasn't flat. Not completely. The life was still there. The warmth was still there. The anticipation was still there. It just kept showing up after she turned away from me. Then came the mornings. Certain workdays, the supposedly boring ones, started getting more effort than usual. Better blouse. Extra time on her hair. Perfume for a day of internal meetings. Lip gloss when she claimed she'd barely be seen. I noticed it because it didn't match the story anymore. A woman too worn down to kiss her husband goodnight shouldn't suddenly look almost excited to go sit in traffic for a meeting she complained about all week. I still didn't accuse her. I kept telling myself there had to be another explanation. Until one Friday night, when I came upstairs early and caught her standing by the dresser with her phone in one hand and a half-buttoned blouse in the other, smiling at something on the screen like it had reached into her chest and switched her back on. She didn't hear me at first. Then I stepped into the room. And whatever was in that smile vanished so fast it felt like I had interrupted something I was never supposed to see. That was the moment my patience stopped feeling noble. And the worst part was, I still hadn't even asked the question yet. After that moment in the bedroom, I didn't confront her. That probably sounds weak if you've never lived inside a slow betrayal. People imagine there's always some clean instant where a husband sees one suspicious thing and immediately turns into a detective or a fighter or a man with perfect instincts and sharp questions. Real life isn't like that. Real life is messier. Especially when the person making you feel crazy is your wife, and the marriage didn't collapse in one obvious event. It thinned out over months, through routines. Through excuses. Through all the little ways a woman can deny you warmth while still handing you enough ordinary life to keep you doubting yourself. So no, I didn't ask her who she was smiling at. I stood there for half a second longer than I should have, watched her put the phone face down on the dresser, and let her ask whether I had packed my blue button-down for the dealership banquet the following week like nothing in the room had shifted. I said yes. She nodded. Then she went back to getting ready for bed, carrying that same controlled, almost irritated calm she always seemed to have when my presence threatened to turn into a real question. That night, I lay beside her in the dark and did what I had been doing for months. I tried to explain her back into innocence. Maybe it was a joke from work. Maybe one of her friends sent something funny. Maybe I was so starved for signs of life from her that any private smile now felt like evidence of something darker. I turned all of it over in my head because the alternative wasn't just painful. It was humiliating. If my wife was still capable of anticipation, still capable of warmth, still capable of little secret sparks of excitement, and I was the only place those things no longer existed, then the problem wasn't stress. The problem was me. Or at least that was how it felt then. The next week made it harder to keep lying to myself. Claire's phone became even more attached to her. Not in some cartoonishly obvious way. She didn't start hiding in closets or sleeping with it under her pillow. That would have almost been a relief. Something clean. Something I could point to without sounding pathetic. No, with Claire it stayed subtle enough to gaslight me. The phone just stopped being something she ever casually left behind. If she walked into the bathroom, it went with her. If she switched laundry from washer to dryer, it was in her back pocket. If we were watching TV and she went to refill her water, the phone came too, even if she was gone for less than a minute. She also started reacting to it before it even made a sound. That was another detail I couldn't stop noticing once I saw it. There's a look people get when they are expecting contact from someone specific. Their attention sits slightly forward all evening, like part of them is waiting at the door before the knock even happens. Claire had that look more and more. On the couch. At dinner. Brushing her teeth. Standing by the mirror in the morning. Not nervous exactly. Tuned in. And then the contradictions got stranger. Tuesday morning, she came downstairs dressed better than she usually did for a work-from-office day. Not wildly different. Just enough. A fitted cream blouse instead of one of her usual plain tops. Hair curled a little more deliberately. Small gold earrings she hadn't worn in a while. Perfume, which she normally saved for client dinners or something actually social. I noticed it because the whole time she got ready, she kept sighing about how pointless the day was supposed to be. Internal meetings. Software rollout nonsense. A boring lunch and learn. Nothing exciting. Yet she looked like she was headed towards something she wanted to be seen for. I asked if she had a presentation. She said no. I asked why she was dressed up then. She laughed once and said I was really reaching lately, like a woman couldn't make herself look nice without it becoming a whole thing. That answer shut me down in the moment, but it stayed with me all day. Not because of what she said. Because of how quickly she said it. How prepared she always seemed to be for me noticing the wrong detail. That night, she came home tired in that performative way she'd gotten good at. Shoes off by the door. Purse dropped heavily on the console table. Long exhale in the kitchen. She said the meetings had drained the life out of her and asked if I minded handling dinner because she could barely think straight. I made dinner. Chicken, rice, vegetables, something simple. She barely touched it. Mostly stared at her phone beside the plate and answered me in half sentences while I talked about a customer at the dealership threatening to call corporate because his air conditioning still smelled weird after 3 visits. Then, about 20 minutes into the meal, her phone lit up. I saw the whole shift happen in 1 second. Her eyes sharpened. Her posture changed. The corners of her mouth softened. Not a big smile. Just enough to remind me that the woman sitting across from me was not emotionally exhausted in the way she kept claiming. She was selective. I asked if work was still bothering her. She turned the screen face down before answering and said it was just a group chat from the office making fun of the same useless lunch and learn she had complained about earlier. That should have sounded harmless. Instead it felt rehearsed. Not the words themselves. The speed of them. The instant cover already waiting. I nodded and kept eating. But after dinner, when she went upstairs to shower and took the phone with her, I stood in the kitchen with my plate in my hand and finally admitted something to myself I had been resisting for weeks. I didn't believe her anymore. That realization didn't feel dramatic. It felt tired. Like a muscle finally giving out after compensating too long. Once that happened, more pieces started standing out. She stopped changing in our room completely. Not occasionally. Completely. Underwear and bra into the bathroom. Pajamas in the bathroom. Even if she had just showered and was wrapped in a towel, she'd still turn away or wait until I left the room before getting dressed. It wasn't modesty. It was withdrawal. Physical, intentional, unmistakable once I stopped dressing it up as a phase. One Friday evening, I came home early because a coworker covered the last hour of my shift so I could make a doctor's appointment the next week. Claire was in the home office with the door mostly shut. I wasn't trying to snoop. I was heading upstairs to change when I heard her laugh. A real one. Warm. Low. Personal. Not the work laugh she used on Zoom calls. Not the bright customer service tone she saved for people she had to manage. This was softer than that. Closer. I stopped in the hallway without meaning to. Then I heard her say, in a voice I had not heard directed at me in months, that somebody was bad. Not bad in an irritated way. Bad in that playful, pleased way adults use when they're already standing inside a flirtation and both of them know it. My chest went cold so fast it almost felt clean. A second later the floor creaked under my shoe, and the laugh stopped. When I walked in, she was sitting at the desk with her laptop open, phone face down, expression reset. So fast. So practiced. She looked up and asked why I was home early. I told her the truth. She nodded once and said she was just finishing some reports before Monday. I asked who she had been talking to. There was the tiniest pause. Then she said nobody, just a stupid voice memo from one of the women at work. I stood there looking at her, at the phone turned face down near her elbow, at the laptop screen she wasn't even looking at anymore, and I knew two things at once. First, she was lying. Second, she expected me to accept it because up to that point, I always had. So I just nodded and left the room. And for the first time since all of this started, I stopped asking myself whether something was wrong in my marriage. I started asking how long my wife had been living somewhere else while still sleeping in my bed. After that Friday in the home office, I stopped trying to be patient in the old way. Not loud. Not dramatic. I didn't start checking behind the shower curtain or demanding passwords or throwing accusations into the kitchen just to hear them hit the cabinets. That kind of panic would have only helped Claire. It would have made me look exactly like the version of me she had already been quietly building in her head, the husband who couldn't handle stress, the man who made phases feel heavier than they were, the guy who mistook normal privacy for betrayal because he needed too much reassurance. No, I had spent nearly a year feeling stupid for wanting basic affection from my own wife. If there was a truth underneath all this, I wanted it before she had the chance to name me crazy for sensing it. So I got quieter. And once I got quiet, the house changed. Not because Claire softened. She didn't. That was the first thing that mattered. If I stopped reaching for her, stopped bringing up the distance, stopped trying to talk us back into something warmer, nothing in her seemed to miss it. She moved through the rooms the same way she had for months. Practical. Efficient. Present enough to function, absent enough to wound. She still asked whether I had grabbed cat food. Still reminded me when the property tax payment was due. Still left little notes about dry cleaning or packages or the trash schedule on the kitchen counter. But the difference was, now I was no longer reading any of it as marriage. I was reading it as cover. That shift made the details louder. I noticed that Claire's phone attention followed a rhythm. Late morning. Around 5 in the afternoon. Then again after 10:30 at night. Those were her windows. Those were the times she became harder to pin down emotionally, like part of her was already waiting somewhere else before the screen even lit up. If we were in the same room during one of those windows, I could feel her attention running on a second track beneath whatever she was pretending to do with me. The mornings became impossible to ignore first. She started dressing for ordinary office days like she expected to be looked at. Nothing wild. That was what made it harder to call out. Better blouse. More careful makeup. Hair done before internal meetings she supposedly hated. Perfume for days she had once claimed were so pointless she planned to leave early if possible. And every time I noticed, every time I let my eyes stay on the contradiction for one beat too long, she'd answer the question before I asked it. She'd say she just felt like making an effort. Or she'd mention a presentation. Or she'd roll her eyes and act like a grown woman putting on earrings should not become some grand psychological event. Maybe it shouldn't have. But women don't usually start trying harder to be seen on the exact same days they stop wanting their husbands to see them at all. That thought sat with me for a while. The next break came on a Tuesday night. I had fallen asleep on the couch in the den after a long shift, TV still on low, one of those old action movies running in the background like noise more than entertainment. I woke up around 11:20 with that strange, sharp awareness people get when something small is wrong before they know what it is. The house was dark except for the hallway light upstairs. Claire wasn't in bed. I went up quietly, not because I was sneaking, but because the whole house had that fragile late-night stillness and I didn't want to break it before I understood it. The bedroom door was open a crack. I could see our bed, the lamp off, my side untouched. Claire was sitting on the floor in the master closet in one of her oversized sleep shirts, back against the built-in drawers, phone in her hand. She was smiling. Not some casual little twitch from a meme. Not boredom killing time. A real smile. Soft. Private. Almost shy in a way I had not seen on her face in so long it made my chest hurt before my brain caught up. Then I heard it. A quiet laugh under her breath, followed by her typing quickly with both thumbs. I stood there in the dark hallway and felt something inside me go dead calm. Because a woman who says she is too exhausted to kiss her husband goodnight does not end up sitting on the closet floor at 11:20 at night looking like that unless her energy has found a new home. I stepped back before she saw me and went into the guest bathroom instead. Turned the faucet on, flushed the toilet, gave the house an innocent sound it could wrap itself around. By the time I came back into the bedroom, Claire was under the covers, phone charging on her nightstand, body turned away from me in that now familiar shape. She asked if I had been in the bathroom. I said yes. That was it. But after that, I didn't need to wonder anymore whether the late-night light in our room meant anything. It did. The next day, I started keeping notes in my phone. Nothing theatrical. Just dates, times, patterns, odd details I knew I would otherwise start doubting. Tuesday, 11:20 p.m., closet floor, smiling at phone. Thursday, dressed up for internal meetings. Friday, laughed in home office before saying it was a voice memo from a woman at work. Monday, left table twice during dinner to answer a quick work thing. I told myself I was doing it because memory gets slippery when someone has spent months teaching you not to trust your own reactions. Really, I was doing it because the truth was starting to form a body and I needed to see its outline. A few days later, I got the clearest piece yet. Claire left her iPad on the kitchen counter while she ran upstairs to take a shower before dinner with one of her friends. She almost never did that. Usually it traveled with her from room to room the same way the phone did. Maybe she was distracted. Maybe she thought I was still too trained to stay in my lane. Maybe she didn't realize that once a man stops begging for reassurance, he starts noticing whatever is left in the silence. The screen lit up while I was standing at the sink. A message banner slid across the top. I only saw part of it before it disappeared, but part was enough. It wasn't a work group. It wasn't a female friend. It wasn't some project thread from her office. It was a first name I had never heard before, and underneath it, just a few words. Still thinking about this morning. I froze with one hand on the counter and stared at the dark screen after the message vanished. This morning. Not last week. Not some old inside joke. Not work nonsense spilling over into after-hours chatter. This morning. That meant whatever had been happening was not living only in texts and smiles in the protected little world behind a lock screen. It had crossed into real time. Real space. Real contact. Something had happened before lunch, and my wife was carrying it into the kitchen of our house while I stood there trying to remember when she had last looked at me with anything softer than impatience. I didn't open the iPad. Not yet. I stood there staring at my reflection in the darkened glass and understood, finally, with a clarity that almost felt merciful, that I was no longer investigating whether Claire was betraying me. I was investigating how much of my marriage had already been handed to someone else before I even knew his name. The reveal didn't come with a confession. It came with a name. After Claire went upstairs, I stood in that kitchen for maybe 30 seconds looking at the dead screen of her iPad like it might light back up and save me from the version of reality I was already standing in. It didn't. Still thinking about this morning. That line kept replaying in my head because it ruined the last decent lie I had left. I could no longer tell myself this was just emotional drift. Just attention seeking. Just a work flirtation that got a little too warm because marriage had gone stale and neither of us knew how to say it. This morning meant contact. This morning meant history. This morning meant my wife had already built some part of her day around another man before coming home and telling me she was too tired to be touched. I didn't confront her that night. That was deliberate. By then, I understood Claire's rhythm too well. If I went upstairs with only a partial glimpse and raw emotion, she would do what she had been doing for months. She'd shrink it. Redirect it. Make my reaction the problem. She'd say it was work, or a joke, or a misunderstanding, or she'd skip right past the message and make the real offense my crossing into her privacy. No. I was done giving her the easier argument. So I let the night happen. She came downstairs dressed for dinner with her friend Marissa, heels on, perfume light but noticeable, phone in hand. She asked if I minded feeding the cat later because she'd probably be out past 9. I said sure. She leaned down like she was going to kiss my cheek, then seemed to think better of it and just said thanks. That almost broke me more than the message had. Because it showed how natural the distance had become for her. How reflexive. She could walk out the door carrying somebody else's morning in her head and still treat her husband like a decent enough guy to handle small household tasks while she was gone. After she left, I went back to the counter and picked up the iPad. I wasn't proud of that. But there's a point where pride becomes another way of helping someone lie to you. The message thread was still there. The name at the top was Gavin. Not saved as a last name. Not marked with work. Just Gavin. That told me enough before I even opened it. People label harmless contacts. They leave off labels when the person already occupies a different kind of space. The thread itself wasn't long, which meant she had been deleting. But not cleanly enough. There were gaps. Jumps. Pieces of a conversation that clearly stretched farther than the screen was willing to admit. A few lines were enough. You looked distracted after. Hard not to be. He notice anything? And then the one I already saw. Still thinking about this morning. I scrolled a little farther and found one more from earlier in the week. Next time you're not leaving so fast. That one made my stomach go cold. Not because it was graphic. Because it was casual. Familiar. It lived in that awful space where two people have already crossed enough lines that future ones can be discussed like scheduling. I took screenshots and sent them to myself. Then I deleted the evidence from her sent folder, locked the iPad, and put it back exactly where it had been. After that, I sat in the dark den until nearly midnight, not drinking, not pacing, not trying to talk myself out of what I knew. Just sitting there while the house made all its normal little sounds around me. Refrigerator hum. Air vent clicking on. The cat hopping off the armchair. It was almost insulting how ordinary the house still felt. Claire got home at 10:47. I know because I looked at the microwave clock the second I heard her key in the door. She came in light on her feet, carrying that relaxed after-social energy she used to bring home for me once upon a time. She kicked off her heels by the entryway and stopped when she saw me in the den with the lights off. She asked why I was sitting in the dark. I told her to come sit down. That changed her face immediately. Not guilt first. Alertness. She set her purse down slowly and came over, but she didn't sit beside me. She took the chair across from the couch instead, which told me more than words would have. Distance. Positioning. A room choice you make when something in you already suspects impact. I asked who Gavin was. And just like that, the air left the room. She didn't ask what I meant. Didn't laugh like there must be some harmless explanation. Didn't even try confusion first. She just stared at me. That was all the confirmation I needed before anything else came out of her mouth. Then she asked if I had gone through her iPad. I remember laughing once, not because any of it was funny, but because there it was. The move I had expected. Skip the betrayal. Go straight to my method. Turn the focus. Preserve whatever was left of her moral ground by pointing at the one thing I did after months of being treated like a tolerated inconvenience. I told her not to do that. Not tonight. Then I told her I had seen the message, read the thread, and knew enough to be done pretending our marriage was just in a phase. She started crying after that. Fast. I wish I could say it moved me, but by then it only clarified things. She had spent almost a year making me feel pathetic for wanting closeness, overdramatic for asking questions, selfish for noticing rejection. Tears now felt less like remorse and more like panic finally running out of places to go. I asked how long. At first she said it had only recently become more than emotional. That phrase almost made me sick. More than emotional. Like categories mattered. Like betrayal was cleaner if you gave it softer language. I asked again. This time she said 4 months. 4 months since it turned physical. Longer emotionally. Gavin worked in implementation consulting for one of the software vendors her company used. That was how it started. Meetings. Rollout calls. Follow-up lunches after project issues. Then texting. Then private jokes. Then the unusual rotten little sequence people act like they couldn't see while they were building it. I asked if this morning meant exactly what I thought it meant. She covered her face and nodded. He had met her before work. That was the reveal that hit hardest. Not that she was cheating. Not even that she had been doing it for months. That she had already spent part of the day with another man, come home carrying the afterglow of it in her phone, and still stood in our bedroom changing into sleep clothes she no longer let me see her put on. That was the humiliation underneath the affair. She had not just given her body elsewhere. She had made me feel needy and embarrassing for still wanting normal affection while quietly spending excitement, anticipation, and desire on someone else. I asked why she suggested the trip in the first place if all of this was already going on. That question broke something in her. Because there wasn't a clean answer to it. She said she thought maybe the trip would fix how guilty she felt. Said maybe getting away would help her reset. Said she hadn't known what she wanted anymore and hoped the weekend would bring clarity. I just looked at her. Because the truth was uglier and we both knew it. That trip hadn't been for clarity. It had been cover. A romantic gesture big enough to make her look like she was trying while she kept the affair moving underneath it. A pretty mountain backdrop where she could point later and say, "See, I did make an effort." Meanwhile, she was texting another man from the bathroom, from the trails, from the bed beside me. I asked one last question. I asked whether there was ever a real moment during that weekend where she intended to choose me. Not the marriage on paper. Not the house. Not the life we had built. Me. She didn't answer. She just cried harder. That was enough. I told her we were done. The aftermath was shorter than I expected. Not because it was easy. Because there wasn't much left worth fighting over emotionally. She stayed with her sister that night. Then longer. There were lawyers, paperwork, ugly conversations with family, the long boring mechanics of untangling a life after the actual love inside it has already gone dead. Gavin disappeared once things got real enough to inconvenience him, which told me plenty about what that whole relationship had really been worth outside secrecy. I still think about the trip sometimes. Not because I miss it. Because of what it taught me. The affair was its own betrayal. But the deeper one was this: my wife spent nearly a year making me feel pathetic for wanting affection she was still perfectly capable of giving. Just not to her husband.